Hey there, Math Moment Makers. Today, we welcome back TL, a third and fourth grade teacher from Grove City, Pennsylvania. TL, if you remember, joined us back on episode 198, Assessing Multiplication Facts. Way back then, we chatted all about math fact strategies and how we can use different assessment techniques to promote growth.
TL joins us now to fill us in on her continued growth around developing math fact strategies. And she also is here to share her carefully designed math blocks where she's available to work with students in small groups. So stick around and you're going to hear her current pebble in her shoe, which is what standards should she focus on to get her best bang for her buck?
This is another Math Mentoring Moment episode, and it's a Where Are They Now episode where we chat with a teacher just like you who's working through very, very common problems of practice, and together we brainstorm ways to overcome them.
Let's go.
Let's do it. Welcome to the Making Math Moments That Matter podcast. I'm Kyle Pierce.
And I'm John Orr. We are two math teachers from MakeMathMoments.com who together
with you, the community of math moment makers worldwide who want to build and deliver problem-based math lessons that spark curiosity,
fuel sense-making,
and ignite your teacher moves. Welcome back, Math Moment Makers, to another episode. Yes, with another fellow math educator from the Math Moment Maker community. Just like you, we are so excited to bring back TL, who we chatted with at the beginning of this school year. And we've got her back all ready to give us some updates on her progress based on her concerns for her students and their fact fluency and flexibility with, in particular, we talked about multiplication tables, but just general operational sense. We get an update with her, and John, we also dive into what's going on, what pebble is shaking around in her shoe lately.
Yeah, and you're gonna hear all the insights she has on her own teaching in her classroom. She is doing a dynamite job with thinking about what students need and where students need to go, and how she's collecting data to help support that decision making. Like, she's got a well-oiled machine that's happening in her classroom. You're going to hear all about that, and we're going to help her with that current pebble in her shoe, which is a common one about where should we spend the most amount of our time when we have all of these things piling up over here. We've got assessments that we have to get done. What should we do with this time that we have? Like, should I be working on this skill, even though I need to work on this skill? Like, where should we do that? So we're going to talk about all of that. So let's not waste any more time. Let's get right to it. Hey there, TL. Thanks for joining us again. We're bringing you back on the Making Math Moments That Matter podcast. How are you doing?
I'm good. It's the busy time of year right now.
Right.
So we're kind of in, I like to call it crunch time here. And I feel like it's the time where I've gathered all the information about my students, and now we're, I don't know, feeling the pressure, I guess, to start moving students forward. And I coach a little bit of basketball, so it's also a busy time.
That's right up my alley
with that right now too. So busy, but good.
Awesome. Yeah. You know what? It's interesting because those busy times of the year, I know that I'm not in the classroom right now, but I do remember it was like once the busy time got going and you got into that sync, it almost like next thing you know, the school year's over. So there is some positive that goes along with the chaos. TL, you joined us back on episode 198. And we were doing all kinds of chatting. We were talking about different ideas about, like, what are we looking for students in terms of proficiency. We specifically talked about math facts and, some of those, I guess, wonders that we have as educators, right? We come into the classroom. I think something that we realized in that episode is that all educators want students to feel fluent and flexible with math facts. And I guess the big question, the big wonder we had to sort of chew on together was, how do we do that? What does that look like in the classroom? And how do we actually assess that student growth? So I'm wondering, can you give us a little bit of an update? How are things going in the classroom since we last spoke? What sort of, are there any pebbles that have been removed from the shoe? Are there new pebbles added? Give us an update so friends can get a sense of where you are now in the school year.
Yeah, sounds good. So I think my biggest takeaway when I left the last episode was I think I was wanting some like nice packaged with a bow, like, okay, so when they do this, I know that they've mastered math facts. Like this is going to be the thing that shows me that. And I think what I realized after talking with you is that there were a lot of like with problem strings, different types of activities, and things that I were doing that were just providing like real-time meaningful assessment in the classroom. And it was just kind of organizing a way of observing my students doing those things. So when I'm doing problem strings, even sometimes just like when I put a quick warm up on the board when the students come in, I'm doing a lot more of just real time. Like I have just an quick reflection sheet that I write kind of the standard or the skill at the top on. And I'm recording that information in our standards-based grade book that we have now, like just all the time. And it right at the end of the podcast, the last time you had mentioned the problem strings and how those can be gather such meaningful information. And I guess I had been looking at those as instructional tools, but I hadn't thought about the fact that I am gathering a lot of meaningful data on my students when I'm observing them do that. So I think that a big part of what I've been doing is just coming up with better ways to organize the things that I'm observing so that I can kind of look back on that and have that as information for my students. I did kind of put together a multiplication chart with strategies that when I meet with students one-on-one or in small group, I'm kind of keeping track of what I see. And I feel like, especially in the first 9 weeks when we were really focused on multiplication facts, and then we, our first unit is on basic multiplication and division and relating the two. And then our next unit is multi-digit multiplication, like it kind of moves into that. And then this third unit is fractions. And so I felt like I was doing all the things that I wanted and gathering all this great data. And I know that I have students that hadn't mastered those facts yet, and some of those strategies, and still doing it. We have intervention time, still working in small groups and some centers on that. But as kind of the hustle and bustle of the year is going on now, and trying to get the content in and feeling pressure of state tests coming and, all the things that I know I shouldn't do, but I still do. I feel myself kind of getting away from it, or I feel like there's just so much content that I'm trying to get in that it's like, how do I continue to be true to, I have all this data and kind of intervening in the way that I need with the students that I need to intervene with.
Gotcha. Like getting sucked back in,
Yeah. Well, and it's just like, it compounds because it's like, okay, I know these students need to, still work on these strategies, or maybe some students that I want to move towards more efficient strategies with multiplication facts. And then we start working on fractions, and I see some of those same students who maybe need some foundational work there where they're not decomposing fractions yet, so that next skill that we're going to work on. So now it's like I have multiple interventions for multiple kids, and it's kind of trying to decide what to prioritize, I guess.
Gotcha. And it sounds like, I appreciate you kind of telling us where your headspace was after our chat or before our chat. I'm thinking like about, trying to get these kids to master math facts and specifically multiplication, and then realizing that you had this whole set of power that, you weren't seeing originally. And now it's like, I can use this to do all these things, to gather this information that helps them steer in the right way. Like, what are you seeing when you think about those math strings and sequences of questions you're giving your students, and you're kind of capturing this data. You're kind of seeing what they can and what they can't do. And I think we get a lot of information from watching and listening to our students do those and participate and engage in those. What are you seeing with, like, when you have that data and then you use it, what are you seeing in terms of like student growth? Like, are you seeing any kind of growth? You seeing like this change happening with your students by using and utilizing this approach that we were chatting about last time?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, just a quick example I can think of is at the beginning of the year, I was really focusing on foundational facts with like 2s and 5s and 10s.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that I was really looking for is like that I didn't want moving forward to become more efficient if they're like still in the counting phase and kind of skip counting by 2s, or expect with their 2s. That would be the big one that I would kind of intervene and talk to them about how their 2s are their doubles. And so yes, you can skip count by 2s, but you could also think of 2 times 8 as 8 plus 8 and doubling it. And a lot of my students, it was funny, I just assumed that maybe it was an addition thing. Like if I went back, like that they just didn't have their doubles facts memorized yet. And I started realizing that they did, in fact. And once we kind of did some different, I used like math flips and some different interventions to kind of just remind them of that and kind of push them to be more efficient. I realized they didn't need to skip count by 2s. They did, in fact, have that doubles fact memorized. They just didn't make the connection between their 2s and that. So that was like, that's the kind of thing that I've seen, like where I'm moving them from skip counting by 2s to now they see 8 times 2, they know it's 8 doubled and they can do 16, like that kind of thing. So definitely using like more sophisticated and efficient strategies. Students that, 7 times 8, I would see them writing like 8 plus 8 plus 8 plus 8 plus 8 on their page and kind of carroting together like 16 plus 16 plus another 8 or whatever. And then eventually like them being able to say, well, 8 times 5 is 40, 2 more 8s is 16, like just seeing those more sophisticated strategies developing. And it's nice because the way I'm recording it, I see it right there. Like I see what strategies they were using and where they're kind of going. So seeing that growth and knowing that they're definitely starting to think multiplicatively instead of maybe in that counting phase or additive phase.
Well, and something I can hear in your description just now, since being on the episode, is I think something that you already articulated that you've realized is that you have like quite a wealth of data in front of you, like quite a bit of assessment information. And, for you to be able to, and I think sometimes it's hard for us because, as you had mentioned earlier, it's like we sort of want it to be in this nice package. It's almost like everything's, perfectly done and we've, checked all the boxes and everything is perfect. But in reality, oftentimes we know a lot about what students can do, what they know, understand, and can do. But then other times, though, there's things that we don't know. We make certain assumptions based on what we know they've done or haven't done. And that realization about your doubles, and then I'm going to guess like maybe near doubles might be like very helpful as well, is this opportunity for you to start looking at the math more multiplicatively, which is great. So it sounds like, there's a like progression there, which is awesome to hear. So it sounds like some students are making some gains, which is great. You're documenting, which is awesome. Something else I heard that I jotted down for myself on this end was just even the idea of pulling small groups, sometimes one-on-one, to be able to work with those students more so. And it sounds like you're documenting how, what students are doing and maybe some of the things you're not seeing. All of this work is so helpful, not only for you, but for students to get a sense of, hey, where am I and where do we want to go to next? So that is so awesome that you're making these moves. And in reality, that was the beginning of the school year, essentially, when we spoke to you, and we're in the midpoint of the school year now. So, I mean, within a very short period of time, it sounds like you've got a really good thing going there. So I'm wondering, it sounded like there's a new pebble, or maybe a pebble that has reemerged, which I think we all have. And it sounds like, you're going, okay, we're working on math facts. We're doing this work over here, and that's great. And I think over the long run, there's a ton of benefit that's going to happen, like that's going to come. So, if nothing else, students are going to be more fluent and flexible with number. Oh, there was one other thing I wanted to mention too. You mentioned about this idea of students making the connection or not making the connection, about this idea of, instead of skip counting by twos, actually like seeing it as 2 8s and them knowing what 8 doubled really is. For us to be explicit, taking that time to help make those connections with students and make sure, even if you think they know, oftentimes it's really helpful for us to reiterate or be very, very explicit, because oftentimes what seems obvious to us is actually not obvious to students. So those problem strings oftentimes like almost feel very obvious in how they're crafted, that you almost know what's coming next. For some students, they're treating each of those problems as completely separate or independent problems, which means they're going to miss the total point of the string. So that's great that you're seeing this, need to help students see and make those connections, so that, you're not sort of letting them sort of just assume that they're going to pick up on it. Because I think some of the students that have the greatest needs, some of the greatest struggles, and often are maybe not achieving at the same level as other students in the classroom, those are likely those students who didn't make some of those connections that we thought as educators that were maybe obvious to the group. So bravo to you for all of that work. But let's start maybe chatting a little bit about this other piece. What I think I heard you say was, now that you're doing the math fact thing, you're feeling pretty good about the routine. Of course, you're going to continue to work over there and try to continue getting better in that area. But now it's sort of like all the other content is creeping into your mind. And that seems to maybe be causing a little bit of stress or a little bit of anxiety. Tell us a little bit more about that. What is, let's dig deeper here and try to figure out, like, what is the real worry that you're having, and maybe we can work on it together here.
Okay. I feel like I was in that routine and I was doing really well. Like, it was great. Like, I had all this really good information, and I'd be able to sit down with my student during small group time, or I pull groups 4 days a week, and then 1 day a week we do ST math. I don't know if you're familiar with ST math, but we do a little bit of ST math time. And while they're doing that, I pull students and really work one-on-one. And it was awesome. I was having all these like great moments with students where I'd be able to show them, like, here's what I observed you doing, and I think like this is where I'd like to see you go. And we were really like, with multiplication facts, we were in the groove. And then like Christmas break came, and then we came back and we had to do our benchmark testing. So we've been doing that, and we kind of have like this curriculum-based assessment that we have to give our mid-year. So we'll be doing that the next couple of days. I feel like time's ticking by. And in the meantime, I'm still teaching new content. And now I'm like seeing all these other gaps, or, things that I want to help students on, but I still want to go back to the multiplication. And it just feels like it's compounding, and I have a lot of things that I want to help students with, and I'm not sure like what to prioritize and how to find the time to do that, I guess. And then on top of that, like we're giving this assessment, which gives us amazing data. It is actually like a nice assessment for that. Like, I will have great information on kind of what prioritized standards students have mastered so far up to this point in the year, according to this one assessment. But it's a nice piece of information, but I know it's just going to add more to my plate of what I now want to provide intervention for, if that makes sense.
Right. I think so. So what you're feeling is that, so what I'm hearing is it's almost like you got this image that I want to help in this one, this area here so much, but all this other stuff is piling up, and it's like, and I gotta keep going with the curriculum. I gotta teach other concepts, and I'm gonna have to do this test, and it's like, I want to go to that over there, but I have to keep going over here, even though I want to go back to this over here. Is that kind of what you're feeling, right?
Yeah, just feeling like I have these like great little ideas of, how to help these students who maybe need a little bit more work on decomposing fractions, so that they're going to better understand this fraction skill that we're working on. And then, but a lot of those students are the same students that I still want to work on these multiplication facts with and these strategies with. And so it's just, our intervention period is 30 minutes and I pull small groups during that 30 minutes. I usually do one group for the full 30 minutes. And then I have an instructional aide who's able to work with a group of students. And then another group of students is on ST Math. And my last group of students plays workplace games. We use Bridges curriculum. So they have the workplace games that they play. So I kind of have it set up that way. But it's almost like, I feel like I wish I could be with all 4 groups every day because there's just so much that I want to do. So that's, and it's like finding the time to still provide, my instructional aide does a lot with fact fluency. That's kind of her focus, especially for the students who still need that. And then we have some other enrichment activities for the students who don't. But I feel like I want to be there with that right now, but I also want to be able to either enrich or provide intervention on the current skills that I'm teaching. So I'm just struggling with doing all the things that I want to do with my intervention time, I guess, and knowing what to prioritize. Like, I know that basic fact and number sense is like the huge foundation for these kids. So do I like stay with that for the kids who really don't have it yet? Or do I intervene with, the current fraction, I guess, is what we're doing right now. So that's what's in my mind at the moment.
Right.
Skills.
And this is like it sounds like you're like, where do I prioritize this? And where do I determine what focusing, where do I focus them on? And I think we all feel like that at sometimes, at some points, especially when we know this has, we can do more here and more over here. TL, when you're getting pulled in all these situations, why do you think that is the big struggle right now? Like what is it like? I think we all go through this. So I guess the question I'm wondering is, why do you feel like that is the biggest struggle right now for you?
I mean, part of it is just the pressure to get these kids prepared for the next step, for sure. I mean, I know like we're halfway through the year now, and it's not so much about state testing for me anymore. I think I've gotten past that. Like, we really have a nice culture in our school of just making mathematicians and truly wanting them to be successful. But I think I do know kind of where they need to go for the next, like for 5th grade math, and I feel like for some of my students, like as it compounds in the grade levels, like you see that gap widening, and you don't want to, I don't want to be part of that problem.
Yes.
So, I want to close the gap. And our curriculum has been super successful at growing students, but sometimes I feel like the top just keeps growing, and the bottom is still growing, but the top is growing so fast right now because the curriculum is so successful for them. And sometimes I feel like the gap is widening even though they're growing, if that makes sense. So it's just, I don't feel that it's state testing for me. It's like a true desire to make these kids successful mathematicians. So like that's, like I want to prepare them for the next step, whatever that step is for them, 5th grade math, I guess, next year.
Absolutely. And, I think there's a lot of people listening right now who are feeling the same way at all different like levels of success, right? Where, some educators have like an entire group that they feel like is way behind, but then others have some that it's like there's students that are doing well, even some of their students that maybe came in with, maybe a couple of pieces that, weren't quite there that you had kind of hoped they would have when they come into your class. We know that's always going to be, something that is happening. And then the challenge becomes, as you mentioned, it's like in our minds, we want everyone to be together. Like we want everyone to be this wonderful group and everyone's going to progress at exactly the same level. But in reality, what I guess we know deep inside is that, you know, students who do have, let's say, a little bit of that head start, whether it's because they have more support at home, whether they've, you know, just those experiences are a little bit different. Maybe they've just made some connections without things being super explicit for them. So we'll call them like kind of like the lucky ones. Regardless of how or why that's happening, the reality is that in a way, I feel like if those students were waiting up for the other students, you would probably not feel so great either, right? So, I mean, it's one positive, I suppose, to take away is that all students are growing. And you want those students to close that gap, but in reality, what typically happens is the opposite, as you mentioned, right? Like the research would suggest the gap widens. But one differentiator that I'm hearing from you that doesn't always happen is oftentimes those students who have struggled, they tend to not make very many gains at all, and that increases that gap so much more significantly. So the fact that it sounds like you're having some success with those students, that those students are learning, that you're assessing as you go, and you can see the growth in these students is such an important piece for you to understand and to recognize.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, of course, you want to continue and do your best to try to help these students. But the reality is that you're going, well, if I'm giving students support, my wonder might be is that maybe you start to look at that schedule of those small groups that you have. So when you're working one-on-one or small group, I don't know if you, I don't, it sounds like you're meeting with all the students in the class. Is this true, or is it?
I do.
Groups?
I start the year out meeting with them all like on a 4-day rotation, and I just meet with them once a day. And then about halfway through the first 9 weeks, as I get to know the students more, I differentiate that a little bit. So I actually have like a 6-day rotation, and 2 of those groups I meet with twice.
Love it.
In the 6 days. So I'm meeting with some students more than others.
I love it.
And actually those same group of students are with me or an instructional aide 4 out of the 6 days. So it's, I do differentiate that a little bit.
So that, like, it sounds like, you know, I was in my mind thinking if right now it was like sort of equal. Oftentimes we think equitable is equal, when in reality, it sounds like you already have a pretty good rotation. You have a good feel for maybe some students that may require additional small group instruction support. There is that opportunity for you to maybe even reassess what you're doing now and sort of look at that and go, is there a way I can restructure this? Like, so instead of some groups, you know, you're seeing them twice, does it make sense that some of those groups you're seeing like 3 times, or maybe there's a different adjustment where maybe the time spent with some of the other groups maybe is cut in half, and the time spent with these other groups is increased a little. So there are some other, you know, methods or things that you might want to do. I think it's great that you're still offering support to students in all of the different, you know, sort of categories in your classroom, all of those different levels of achievement right now. I think that's fantastic. But I suppose you could maybe play with those gears a little bit and see, hey, if there's an opportunity for me to sit, and I think too, the other piece that you might want to think about, I'm sure you already are thinking about, but just as a reminder is, when you look at those groups, if you were to kind of envision in your mind, and if you had a little checklist of the different groups you've had, and you sort of try to, in your mind, envision that amount of time that you're spending, who stands to benefit the most from that time, you know? So like, and how important is that growth to that group versus maybe this group? So for example, a group that might be accelerated, are they able to maybe get some of those gains without as much direct support from me? And maybe when I look at this other group, would this group be able to make the same gains independently that the group in over here was able to make independently. And that might also factor into maybe your organization a little bit. I certainly don't want to suggest that the way you're doing it isn't amazing. I think it sounds like you've got an amazing thing going on there. But just as a thought, it could be something like if you're feeling this pressure, like you're feeling like you want to offer more, I wonder if, doing a little bit of reflecting on that and sort of, you kind of look at it as almost like, where are we going to get the most bang for our time, so to speak, right? Like if I spend 20 minutes with this group and they, are bumped here and on their own, they were going to get to almost the same place. Maybe that time might be better allocated somewhere else. Maybe that's not the case, but these are just things that maybe you can, sort of ask yourself. You'll never know for certain, but at least you can know that you're continuing to put a lot of deep thought into this. And I think, honestly, these students, John, I don't know what you're thinking over there, but for me, I'm thinking like these students are so lucky to have such a reflective teacher who has already sort of got an amazing thing going on in terms of the structure of your math program. And you're constantly sort of playing with those gears to try to figure out, hey, how do we pull this lever and try to maximize the time and the effort that you're putting in? So I don't know if any of those ideas sort of resonate with you, or if maybe you're already doing some of that thinking, but I'm curious kind of where your mind's at now.
Yeah, I feel like some of those things that you said about thinking about certain students that might benefit the most from the small group and the growth, and the students that are going to continue to grow. That's kind of what I've been grappling with. I feel like I need to do more of that, and I'm anxious to kind of get some of this data back and kind of look at just the big picture and who's really growing across the board, with our district assessment as well as our kind of nationally normed growth assessment that we give. But I definitely have, like, this year more than maybe any group of students, I have like certain students that just really, even students who are really successful, so, students right now who are achieving and growing, but they're my students that I have a few of those students who need to be with me. Like that's just how they are. They do better in small group. They, they attend better. They pick up those they work harder. It's just, that's how that is this year. So this year more than ever, I've really had to work with those groups and change. So I think it is just reassuring to hear you kind of reiterate that, that that's the right thing, because you have, it's easy to question, like, should I be seeing this student more? And I feel like this year has been a little bit like I kind of fix one problem and another one springs. Like, just, I think I finally have my, this group exactly the way I need it. And I have who in front of me, the kids who need to be here most. And then this child over here is the one that I'm like, oh no, like I've lost him or her now. You know what I mean?
Right.
So I'm definitely constantly shifting, and it definitely depends on what content and what skills we're currently working on. Sometimes certain students struggle more than others. I think that for me, like once I gather this data and I kind of know, we are actually whole school from your podcast, like the idea of mastery days that you guys had done. There's quite a few of us in our math department now that we kind of grapple with those after we get our curriculum-based assessment back here. And we have, so in small group intervention, they'll have some time where they do this whole reflection and kind of see what skills they've mastered and what skills they haven't. And then they have time in our small group intervention to kind of work on those. And then we have mastery tasks that they can go back and reassess and do. Right. So I'll be doing some of that in small group, and I definitely have like groups of students that I know can definitely be more independent with that than others. So I think that will be great. But kind of as we start focusing on that and I start getting more data, like, I guess, do I spend, like, is it right to continue to spend the time pulling the small groups? Like, how do I prioritize my time with, do I continue to work on the multiplication strategies and do that along with it? Like, that's where I struggle, like just to find, because I also find that you think that 25 or 30 minutes is a long time, but if I really want kids to like think deeply about math and I'm not just throwing like they need time to sit on it, right? So that's just where I'm at. Like that's kind of where my wheels are turning, but
yeah, and rightly so. And I think your discussion there and of reflecting on your assessment days, and I know that freed up a lot of time for us to help students, kind of help them prioritize what they think should be the priority, and also helped me see where the priority for each of them was going to be. Because we had those mastery days, because we had that data to say, look, we're here and on this skill, this skill, and this skill, but we're over here on this skill and this skill. We should be spending our mastery day on these skills over here to bring this level up. But thinking about whole group and in bigger instructions questions, we often ask ourselves, when we're planning courses or when we're planning where a particular group is to reflect on what you feel is most important from the curriculum or the standards that you want to take this group on, right? Like we've got a list of standards. We've got the curriculum standards that we have to, to go through.
Are they all that important?
Right. So sometimes even though, here in Ontario, we have a huge list, but there are overall expectations that we have to say report on, and sometimes those standards are very general, and so it allows us, I think, the freedom to go, where do we think the most important expectation or standards are, like what do we want to focus this particular, and it can change from year to year, right? So it's in group to group. So what do we want to reflect on as the most important part, and then how do we kind of divvy up these days that we have so that I can narrow in on what I believe is the most important. So I know you're saying like, what should I focus on? But I think that's like, I think that's a great question. I think you have to ask yourself, what do I believe is the most important for this group this year?
I love that idea. And the thing I'm getting in my mind, or the vision I'm getting, John, is just even this, if you were to look at those standards and then you were to maybe even take a peek into next year and you go, okay, oh no, the whole school's closing down on you. Those watching on YouTube.
I'm not moving enough.
The lights just went off.
It's
the
going to
school,
start
the
turning
school
off
thought no
too.
one's here right now. We're going to shut all the lights off.
Hopefully they don't shut the internet off on you there. But when you're looking at your standards and then you start peeking ahead and you start looking at like what's coming next. So like what is going to actually, sort of, we'll call it, be that, that's going to reappear in later episodes of mathematics class, like what are those fundamental pieces that are going to sort of make it a lot easier for them to continue advancing, versus are there some, and I think this happens in every grade level, where there are some where it's sort of like, okay, it kind of like maybe fizzles off a little bit, right? Like there's certain ones I pick on mean, median, and mode a lot because, I mean, they're great. They're important. They're very helpful in life, but I don't know if that's like necessarily the hill I want to die on versus something else. Like when I think about number and operations, like the mean is all built on partitive division. So when I look at that and I go, are there other topics in there that maybe that topic specifically isn't something that I think is of utmost importance? Is it a way for me to access some of the other skills that I wanted them to build on anyway? I think about fractions like that as well. Like, could I approach fractions here in Ontario? Our new curriculum actually approaches fractions in the early years from K to 4. Very aggressive is probably the wrong word. I was going to say they approach it pretty optimistically from the partitive division lens. So they look at essentially fractions. They introduce the idea through a fair sharing context where the result is a fraction. So rather than us just saying, hey, take half a Kit Kat bar, or hey, take, 3/4 of this, they actually would take something like, hey, we have 3 submarine sandwiches and there's 4 people that have to have an equal amount of sub. How many subs per person do they get? So they introduce that early on, as essentially it's division. What an awesome opportunity for us to talk about division and also get to play in the land of fractions. So there's all kinds of these pieces hidden on you. They really want you to go home, by the way, because those lights
like
keep going
censored,
off
and at a certain time it does do this. So
I love it. I love it. But when you look at that, so, you sort of think about, okay, what expectations would be a great excuse to do more of the ones that I really care about? And then are there some other expectations or standards that are there that may not necessarily be sort of like a make or break standard? Now, we're not saying completely skip over them, but I wonder if you were to look at, say, all the standards that you haven't explored yet this year, and you look at all the school days that you have left, and you had to bring up, partitive division again, fair share them. I think as educators, we often sort of go, okay, I've got this many days, I have this many standards, I'm going to like break them up evenly. And in reality, what we probably want to do is go, you know what? I'm going to give like one day to all these standards, but then I got these extra days. Where do the extra days go for the standards that are left, right? Does everybody get a second day? Or are there some standards that it's like, hey, we did one day, we explored it, we learned about it, we had fun with it, but I want to spend like 2 additional days over here, or whatever that number ends up being. But it could be a fun little activity. Fun maybe is a bit of a stretch, but it could be a helpful activity for you to kind of look at that. And I wonder as well, by doing that process, would that potentially make you feel more confident, more comfortable with sort of how the rest of the year is going to pan out, versus I think what we think in our mind is it's like this massive never-ending list. And we sort of come to the conclusion right out of the gate that we're like, there's no way I'm going to get to it all. But if we sort of stop and we go, hey, here's what we've got left, here's how much time I've got left, and now I sort of get a plan in place, which will never work out perfectly, but at least it gives you something to look forward to and sort of go, you know what? I feel good about how I'm going to divvy up the rest of the time that I have with these students. And I feel good about, if we can maximize that time through the routines that you already have set in your classroom, that at the end of the year, I will have done my absolute best to provide these students with an awesome opportunity. I think, thinking like that, I'm feeling super positively for you. And I feel like that might give you the opportunity to like sleep better at night. Cause it sounds like you probably need to have some nice nights of sleep, because you're doing a great job.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I think that's good. As I was listening to you talk, one of the things that we have is like kind of a student assessment binder where they, reflect, actually we do it in language arts and in math, but they kind of reflect on the assessments that we give, and they kind of can look at certain skills and what skills they mastered on that and which ones they didn't, and how that's impacting the prioritized standards, and if they've hit mastery or not, kind of thing. And so as they kind of show us enough evidence throughout the year that they've mastered a prioritized standard, we go through and like highlight those on in their binder for them, kind of as we conference. And so I was thinking with some of my students, it would be helpful if I kind of did pick out the most important ones that they kind of like, if I highlighted those or kind of mark them differently. Oh my goodness, I'm in the dark. Oh, this is good. I hope my administration watches this, because I've complained about it a couple of times.
We're getting all kinds of pebbles out of your shoe today.
Yeah. But I was just thinking that it would be great if I could say like, let's focus on like these 4. And, once you have hit these 4, then we'll worry about, because I do think that there are 3 or 4 really big ones that stand out, before the others. So it would be, and I think it would be empowering for them to kind of see like, okay, we've got that big one off the list, because our students have a lot of ownership in what they've mastered and what they haven't. And they take a lot of pride in that, and they kind of love our curriculum is very spiraled, and it kind of builds towards mastery. It comes together kind of geniusly at the end of the year, where it feels like all these pieces start to fall together. And
Love it.
as it does, it's really cool to see them kind of be like, yes, I've got it, and we start. But I think it would be super helpful for some of those other kiddos as we're doing mastery days if they didn't see this long list of like,
no,
if they just had a few to focus on, it would be a lot, and it would be a lot less overwhelming for me as the teacher as well. So I think that would be helpful.
Yeah, that's a great idea too, and not overwhelming students with that big list. And I think I remember we used to do that as well by unlocking, we used to call it unlocking certain expectations to focus on here, and then we would put up these as the kind of the go-tos, and then after some of those progressed, we'd unlock a few more to kind of keep going on. But I like your idea of kind of highlighting what they should be focusing on first, as our kind of top priority or our main priority for the year. TL, what would you say at this point your biggest takeaway from tonight's conversation is?
I think for me, my main focus is going to be kind of, first of all, working on identifying students who are going to benefit the most from working with me, maybe a little more, and which ones are going to continue to grow. I definitely have those students who they probably only need 10 or 15 minutes a week with me in a small group, and they're pretty intrinsically motivated, and they're gonna grow. So I think kind of working with that, and then kind of trying to work with my 4th grade team and talk to them about like, what do we think, and maybe even talking with the 5th grade teachers, like, in hearing what you guys are saying and coming up with a list of, these are our prioritized standards, but like, what are the most prioritized standards of this list, in preparing my students for 5th grade math? Like, what are the non-negotiables? So I think those are my big takeaways today on what I want to leave here and be able to work on.
I love it. I love it. It's fantastic. And I, just commenting on the last piece, it's interesting because sometimes what we work so hard on, or work so hard to get students to maybe know, understand, and do, may or may not be something that is even a roadblock by the following year. Right. So, I mean, having that conversation, I love that idea that you've shared, that, hey, as a divisional team or a grade band team, where we come together and we sort of talk about where are the hiccups in your grade? And that might be helpful for, the teacher of the previous grade before your students come to you. And, as you have that conversation, and over time, as you start to get a better sense and you go, typically students in my grade tend to struggle in these areas. That could be helpful to the previous teacher. And then when you hear from the next teacher in line and you're going, wow, I spent 5 days on this topic, and you're telling me that topic isn't even on the radar as something that concerns you. Is it because I spent 5 days on it? Maybe. You'll find out if you adjust down, and then all of a sudden now it's a problem in the future, right? It's sort of this balancing act, right? But that conversation, I think, could be so valuable. So that's a great thought and a great next step for you to be taking as well. So this has been incredibly helpful, not only for us to get a sense of where you are along this journey, but I know the Math Moment Makers at home are nodding their heads, have some of the same concerns that you have had. I think we all, as educators, we got into this business because we wanted students to achieve. We want every student to achieve. And in a perfect world, they're all achieving together at a high level, and no one's being left behind. So, I heard that come out in this conversation today. And I think everyone at home is going, you know what? I feel the same way. And by making these small adjustments, we can help to try to, ensure more students learn more math. But one thing that I have a funny feeling that we'll never be able to do completely is make sure that they're all together, all at once. So making sure that you give yourself that grace to know that, hey, you are doing the best work you possibly can, given what you know how to do. And the beautiful part is that you're continuing to learn more, and that's going to continue to help your students now and all of those students in the future. And that was like a perfect time to sign off, because the lights went off for like the 6th time, which is fantastic. But TL, I want to thank you again for coming on the podcast. Dare we bother you to have you back on at some point, whether it's at the end of this school year, maybe it's the beginning of next school year, but where, we connect again, sort of hear how things are going. I know that people who are listening, they always write and let us know that they love hearing the progress that people are making. And just in a half of a school year, we've heard of some really amazing gains, growth, not only as you as a professional, as a teacher, but it sounds like your students are growing in turn, which I think is really inspiring to those who are listening. So if we couldn't bother you, would you be willing?
I would love to
join us again? Maybe the lights can shut off 6, 7, 8 times in that conversation as well.
No,
awesome
I'd
stuff.
love to come back on.
Awesome stuff. Thanks so much, TL, for joining us. And we hope you have a great rest of your evening tonight, and an even better next couple weeks.
Thank you.
Have an awesome night, my friend.
Thank you.
As always, both John and I learned so much from these conversations. And in reality, I think one of the things that I love about these episodes is it really just gives us all a sense to reflect on ideas. So whether you're the person bringing the pebble to the group, or whether you're on the other end and you're being that listening ear, I find that everyone in the conversation gets to grow a little bit, think a little bit, reflect a little bit. And of course, in turn, that helps us to do better in the classroom for more students.
Totally agree there, Kyle. And what better way to do it with another, individual or a group? And we have some of those groups available for you. You can head on over to Facebook, join our Facebook group, Math Moment Makers K-12. Hit us up on all social media at Make Math Moments. We are here to be your sounding board, to be your group. We don't want to be the lone wolves in our districts. We have a community out there of math moment makers who are willing and eager to jump in and help you with your pebble and your shoe. And actually, we would love for you to join us here on the podcast to discuss your pebble in your shoe, just like TL has done now twice. She reached out to us through our form. Just wrote about her pebble, and then we brought her on to chat about it. It's easy. It's non-threatening. We just have a chat here, and everybody gets to win out of this. And so we would love to hear from you. We can only have episodes like this from folks who reach out and put their kind of brave faces on to join us. But we'd love to hear from you. Head on over to makemathmoments.com/mentor. That's makemathmoments.com/mentor. Quick form there. Tell us about your pebble. And the math community, the math moment makers out there, are going to greatly benefit from the conversation we have to figure that out.
Hey, John, there was something, I had an awesome holiday. We're recording this just after the new year, just into January. And, there's one thing that's got me down. Do you know what it is?
It is you didn't eat enough turkey.
No, I ate way too much turkey, John. That's one of the reasons that I had such a great holiday. But there's one thing that kind of hurt my heart a little bit. And it's that this past week, we did not receive any reviews on Apple Podcasts or the other platforms. And that kind of hurts my heart a little bit. And the reason why is because when we have people actively rating and reviewing on all podcast platforms, that actually tells the interwebs to share the show with more educators around the world. And in turn, we get to affect more change in math classrooms around the world. So, my friends, if you have not rated or reviewed the podcast yet, take a moment, pause, and go ahead. Leave an honest one, honest review, honest rating. We would love to see it come in this week.
Show notes and links to resources and complete transcripts. You can find those over on our show notes page, makemathmoments.com/episode 218. That's makemathmoments.com/episode 218.
Well, until next time, my friends, I'm Kyle Pierce.
And I'm John Orr.